Walt Whitman's poem "O Captain, My Captain" was written on the occasion of Abraham Lincoln's assassination. It was first published in the New York Saturday Press in November 1865. The poem is a lament for the dead. It is written in heroic couplets, the last two of each stanza being broken into four lines that incorporate conventional meter and end rhyme. The refrain of the poem serves to heighten the sense of horror and disbelief felt by the speaker upon discovering his leader and surrogate father has died. Let's see the summary of the poem. O Captain, my Captain, our fearful trip is done. The ship has weathered every rack, the prize we sought is won. The port is near, the bells I hear, the people all exulting, while follow eyes the steady keel, the vessel grim and daring. The first four lines of the poem serve to begin the controlling metaphor upon which the rest of the poem builds. A metaphor is simply a figure of speech in which one thing is substituted for another, and a controlling metaphor is a metaphor that impacts, controls, or unifies the entire poem. In this poem, the captain is a substitute for Abraham Lincoln, and the ship is the United States of America. The fearful trip is the Civil War, which had ended just prior to Lincoln's assassination. Thus, the ship is returning home to cheering crowds, having won the prize of victory, just as the Union, led by Lincoln, had returned victorious from the Civil War. The utterance, O Captain, my Captain, is particularly interesting in this light. In one sense, the speaker is addressing his captain directly, but in another, he seems to be speaking to himself about his captain. The repetition helps to assert the uncertainty he feels at the captain's loss. But O heart, 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 O the bleeding drops of red, where on the deck my captain lies, fallen, cold and dead. Lines 5 to 8 communicate the unpleasant news that the captain has somehow fallen dead after the battle. More importantly, the repetition of heart, heart, heart communicates the speaker of the poem's dismay and horror at realizing that his captain has died. The poem is then as much about the I of the poem and how he comes to terms with his grief, how he possesses this information, as it is about the central figure of the captain. The bleeding drops of red are both the captain's bleeding wounds and the speaker's wounded heart. These lines function as a broken heroic couplet, a two-line rhymed verse that originated in heroic epic poetry and is usually, as is the case with these lines, written in iambic pentameter. The second stanza, O Captain, my Captain, rise up and hear the bells. Rise up, for you the flag is flung, for you the bugle trills, for you bouquets and ribbon wreaths, for you the shows a crowding, for you they call, the swaying mass their eager faces turning. In this pivotal second stanza, the speaker of the poem entreats his captain to rise up and hear the bells. The speaker laments that his captain, having led his crew bravely to victory, will not receive the fanfare that is his just due. At the same time, Whitman blends two distinct scenes, one in which crowds gather on his return from military victory, and the second in which people gather to lament him as a fallen hero. The bells of the second stanza are presumably the bells rung in celebration of military victory. However, knowing the great captain and leader has died, the bells might also symbolize funeral bells tolled in mourning. Similarly, the flag is flown in honor of the captain, both as a symbol of rejoicing and victory and as a symbol of lamentation, as in the tradition of flying the American flag at half mast when a respected American dies. The bugle, a quintessentially military musical instrument, alludes to both military victory and to taps, the requiem, traditionally played at funerals of fallen soldiers. Bouquets and wreaths are also common to both celebratory receptions and funerals. Finally, the throngs of people become symbolic as well. Not only are they representative of the people who welcomed and rejoiced at the Union's victory in the Civil War, but they represent the throngs of people who gathered across the nation to mournfully view Lincoln's coffin as it was taken by train from Washington, D.C. to Springfield, Illinois. The crowds remind the reader that the speaker of the poem is not alone in lamenting his captain's death, but rather shares his experience with the masses. In this manner, the poem is in keeping with Whitman's experience. He himself had a powerful personal reaction to the news of Lincoln's death. Lincoln was the captain and father figure of an entire nation, and so the poet's grief, while central to the poem, is shared by the rest of the country. Here, Captain, dear father, this arm beneath your head. The poem again entreats his captain to hear. In this case, he may be referring to the bells of the first stanza or perhaps to himself. His pleas. More importantly, the speaker of the first time calls his captain father. In this manner, Whitman expands the metaphor for Lincoln beyond the more limited scope of a military leader into a father figure, one whose wisdom and teachings led his children into adulthood. The poem celebrates Lincoln as more than simply a great military leader who led the Union to victory during the Civil War and attaches to him a broader significance as the father of this new post-slavery country. It is some dream that on the deck you have fallen cold and dead. In these lines, the speaker asserts that this must be all be a bad dream. Here, the poem captures the speaker's denial. The emotional impact of Lincoln's demise has made it almost impossible for the speaker to accept. The refrain, fallen cold and dead, is slightly altered in this stanza, in that it is apparently addressed to the captain. The effect is to again reinforce the speaker's difficulty with his captain's death. Even though his captain is dead, the speaker continues to speak to him as though he were alive. The last stanza, my captain does not answer, his lips are pale and still. My father does not feel my arm, he has no pulse nor will. The ship is anchored safe and sound, its voyage closed and done. From fearful trip, the victor ship comes in with object won. The speaker of the poem, no longer able to hold out hope, faces up to the reality of his captain's death. The details and images evoked in these lines all serve to reiterate that the captain is deceased. His pallid lips, lack of a pulse, and lack of will. Unlike the two previous stanzas, the speaker in no way addresses his captain directly, but speaks of him entirely in the third person. In this sense, he has finally accepted that his captain is dead. Exult, O shores, and ring, O bells, but I with mournful tread walk the deck, my captain lies, fallen cold and dead. Having finally faced up to his captain's death, the speaker then turns his attention back to the reader. Lines 19 to 24 suggest again the internal division suffered by the speaker of the poem. Having accepted that his captain is indeed dead, it would seem he can now return his attention to the military victory. After all, one could surely argue that the plight of an entire nation of people for a single man. Nevertheless, the speaker of the poem chooses the individual over the larger nation. While exult o'er shores and ring o'er bells is explicitly a call for rejoicing, the speaker himself will not celebrate but will walk with mournful tread, knowing that his captain is indeed fallen cold and dead. The speaker thus celebrates the end of the Civil War but continues to express his need to mourn his fallen hero. An important aspect of this poem is the commitment of the speaker to his fallen leader. referring to him as my captain and even my father. Death, as a matter of fact, is sufficiently striking that it balances out the victory that is portrayed here as a voyage so successful that crowds eagerly cheer as the ship docks. As a tribute to President Lincoln, a man whom Whitman never met once in his fierce loyalty than could even be expected from actual ship's crews or actual sons. It is a loyalty that does show itself sometimes in political followers. Whitman was politically involved, which was a part of his passion for life, and his enthusiasm was particularly sparked by Lincoln, who represented all that he thought a president should be. The speaker of this poem is imagined as a crew member, a son, or as Whitman himself. It is hard to miss the sense of shock felt and conveyed not only in his words but in several techniques. One is the free scattering of exclamation points throughout the poem. There is an early line, "Oh heart, heart, heart," which indicates an inability to express more than a single blurted word. Another factor is the way the poem returns to mentioning the dead body, as if the speaker is trying to force himself to believe it. When this is contrasted with the great success of the voyage, introduced early in the poem, the death is made even more shocking. More pressing than the irony or the pity of death at the moment of success is that the speaker is thinking about himself and what the future will hold for him. Not only do the personal references to my captain, my father convey a sense of personal loss, but the self-consciousness of his actions in the poem's last three lines shows loneliness and apprehension. The speaker who has survived due to the captain's guidance is left to fend for himself now, and he seems unsure that he will be capable. This is the situation that coming of age stories typically focus on youths who are forced by circumstances to make their own decisions. From every indication, there are no specific problems in the speaker's near future. The perils of the actual or symbolic ocean voyage are past, and the people are exulting. It is a measure of how unprepared, even immature, the speaker feels that he fears losing the captain, even when the danger is over. He has no choice, though. He can no longer take orders and no longer has a parent figure whose judgment he can trust. He has to be responsible for himself. Death in this poem is abrupt and unexpected, a matter of being here one moment and gone the next. It is senseless. The poem implies that if the universe were just, the captain who has triumphantly led this ship to safety would at least be able to enjoy the crowd's praise. But death has made that impossible. In this poem, unlike many war poems, there is no glory in death, there is no reward mentioned for a job. The speaker makes no plans to carry on in the name of the captain. Those ideas generally come up later, once the shock of death has worn off. Whitman emphasizes the finality of death with his use of the words fallen, cold, and dead, which not only stress a sudden lack of mobility and lack of heat, but also in the tone of the last three one-syllable words makes the reader hear a corpse thudding lifeless.